Okay, we're back and our day has really started. And this is a guest that we've had before. I know you'll remember him, Stephen Sanchez. Stephen, it's so good to have you here again.
Thank you so much for having me. I love being on the show.
Well, he always brings something so interesting, so that makes it easy for me. So what do you have today?
I just actually had my second chapbook published. It's a collection of poems.
Wow, that's neat.
Yeah, I'm really excited about it. It's actually something really different for me too because, are you familiar with what a chapbook is?
Well, not exactly.
Yeah, like more normally when I ask people like, oh, hey, I have a chapbook. Like, what's a chapbook? I'm like, oh, it's kind of like you know how music artists have full-length albums, like a full record, and then sometimes in between the full-length record they have like the smaller EP that's like a few songs in between the records. So that's kind of what a chapbook is. It's not like a full book. It's more just like a small sampling of poems that'll be coming out in another book.
Oh, fantastic. That sounds great.
Yeah.
So let's tell me what about, wait, before, some of these people might have forgotten you a little bit. So tell me a little bit about yourself and how you got into writing.
Oh, yeah. So I'm Steven. I grew up in the Central Valley and I always really loved like reading and writing. And so I tried lying to myself and told myself I'd be an engineer when I was younger. And I went to school for it for a little bit and I was like, I miss reading and writing. Like, when do I get to take an English class? And my professors were like, no, like that doesn't happen in engineering. I was like, oh, well, I think I'm going to switch majors then. So I think that's when I was like 19, 20. I was like, okay, I really want to start writing more.
Great.
And then I had a professor who was like, yeah, you should write poetry. And ever since then, I was like, okay, I'm going to write poetry.
Oh my gosh, well, poetry's not easy to write. Doesn't it have to come at certain different times of rhyme or something?
Sometimes, yeah. And I think that's what one of the cool things about poetry is that it's been around for like thousands of years. Like it goes all the way back to ancient Greece.
That's for sure.
And so a lot of poets, when it first came out, they talked about, or they had to use rhyme and meter so that way they could memorize it easier because a lot of the times it was performed instead of written. And
oh, that's why. I didn't even know that.
Yeah, so I think that's what's so cool about poetry is that its roots aren't even on paper. Its roots are like in our voices. And like they're just stories that people told and they had like a certain rhythm to help them memorize it better.
Oh, for heaven's sakes. Well, I have had some people come in with their poetry and I didn't hear too much of a rhyme. Maybe they're very tricky or something that you don't really know that it's rhyme.
Yeah, I think some of my favorite poems actually don't really rhyme, because like in the earlier part of like the 20th century or so, like poets were still very like conscious about like, okay, I have this many syllables and I have to make this rhyme and this happen. But then come like the 1950s, maybe a little bit after that, poets started saying, hey, why don't we just kind of write poems like we talk? So that way it's more natural sounding instead of like kind of like super performative. It's more like, oh, hey, I'm just talking to you about this experience.
But isn't that prose?
And that's where a lot of people are like, that kind of goes into prose territory. And I get into a lot of conversations with my friends about like, what's the difference between like a story and an essay and a poem if you don't have to rhyme? And one of the things I like about poems is that in prose, like you go all the way across the page, right? It's like left to right, left to right.
Oh.
And with poetry, at least now that it's on paper and less vocal, you can kind of play with the shape a little bit and like break the lines, like not go all the way or like.
Oh.
And that kind of creates subtle meanings too sometimes too, because you're reading and have you ever read something you're like, okay, I know where this is going? And if you, in a poem, you kind of create that expectation. But then what ends up happening is if you cut it off early, you can kind of surprise your reader and like change the meaning on them too.
Gosh, that's more complicated than I thought it was. I'm going to tell you the truth. I'm not going to go into poetry.
It's okay. I'm terrified of writing prose. Like writing a whole page like of actual words seems really intimidating sometimes.
Okay, let's tell us about your book here that you have.
Oh, so this isn't my chapbook, but one of my poems that's in my chapbook is in here.
Oh.
But my chapbook itself is called Photographs of Our Shadows.
Oh, yeah, I saw that.
And what's really cool is that the press that published it, their name is Agape Editions, and they have a series called the Morning House series. And they're very conscious about making sure that they're providing access to good literature to as many people as possible. And so what they do is, instead of having like an actual print book, to save cost, they actually have it all online. So that way, anyone who needs to get it can get it for free.
Wow.
Yeah, and so the Morning House series publishes about 3 to 4 titles a year, and they're all free to download from the internet.
Oh my gosh,
Yeah.
that's fantastic.
And so, like, when I found out that that's what they did, and they approached me, like, hey, do you want to publish your chapbook with us? I was like, absolutely. Like, that's such a cool idea.
Yeah, well, you know, a lot of people nowadays, they've got so many bills and so many things. They don't really, they want to buy just what they need. They don't want to get into something that's more expensive. And so that's really wonderful. I'd like to get my books to a place where I could get some people to see it free. That would be good too, because people tell each other about what they like. So that's what we got to remember.
Absolutely. And I feel like too, with like online, it's just easier to share too, because it's like, do you have your book on you? It's like, oh, sorry, I don't have any hard copies. Like, you can order it through the press, and people 9 times out of 10 are like, oh, okay, I will, and then they might forget about it or something happens. But if you're like, oh yeah, like it's free, download online, like, oh, okay, they just go click download it and it's there.
Wow,
which is cool.
That's fantastic, especially for poetry, because I think it sort of got lost in what was going on for a while.
What do you mean?
Well, I don't know if as many poetry books have been written in the last, say, 10 years as there were before. What do you think about that?
I don't know. I feel like that's kind of like the blessing and the curse of writing poetry, because you look at any New York Times bestseller list, and it's usually going to be fiction or nonfiction of some sort, right? And very rarely does a poetry book make it onto those lists. So on the one hand, we're kind of like the outsiders in a way, so we don't get a lot of attention. But at the same time, because we're outsiders and we don't have to worry about being, I guess, marketable, so to speak, it gives us a little bit more freedom to write about things that we want to write about without having to worry about like making sales or things like that.
Oh, that's fabulous.
And so I feel like there is a lot of poetry books being published right now. It's just that they're being done by a lot of independent presses. So the publicity isn't quite the same level as, like, say, a fiction book that's released at Barnes & Noble, for instance.
That's right. It's just, I think I'm anxious to find out the subject matter that you're doing, because I know in the old days, if a woman wrote poetry, it's about flowers and springtime and stuff like that, you know. So tell me what your aim is here.
Yeah, so, I mean, it might sound kind of cheesy, but, because, like, I'm queer and I'm Latino, and I didn't really read a lot of literature, a lot of poems, a lot of stories that had people like me in it. And so when I first started writing, I didn't write about those parts of myself. I was like, oh, obviously I can't write about that because no one else is, so it's not okay to write about it. But then I had a professor who's like, no, like, do write about that. Like, the purpose of writing is to create the stories that were not there before. And so that's kind of what I've done with my poems. And I was like, okay, like, what stories do I wish I would have seen before? I'm going to write those experiences. I'm going to write my stories that maybe if someone else read them, they'll be like, oh, hey, I guess it is okay to, like, experience these things too.
Well, you know, I'm so happy that people are open to letting somebody else be what they are and not hating them for it or giving them a hard time for it. And it's so important now, especially when there's so many groups that are just full of hate. And we got to get rid of those somehow. I don't know if we're not going to kill them, but somehow I got to get their mouths shut, because we need to be happy. We had a beautiful country. I wouldn't live in any place else. I'm so happy, and it's California especially. It's a wonderful place to live.
I agree.
Okay, read something for me.
Oh, yeah, sure. Okay, so this poem is in my chapbook that's online, and I wrote it for my brother, and it's called What I Didn't Tell You. You can ask me anything, even about my first kiss, which was at your age and tasted like stale beer. I used to feel guilty swallowing the pulse of another man, but now I know there are many ways to pray. There's a name for that most intimate prayer, La Petite Mort, the little death. If, when your lover rakes your back, you recall the flock of worshippers surrounding you like raptors when they learned you're gay, clawing at your shoulders, squawking for your salvation, Remind yourself you have to die before you can be resurrected. Never forget what the Bible says. When two people worship together, they create a church, no matter where they are, which must include the back seat of a car or the darkest corner of Woodward Park. These are some of the things I wanted to tell you that night in April you called me for help with your history report about the gay rights movement. Neither of us admitted what he knew about the other. Instead, I started with the ancient Greeks, told you it was normal for them, that for one brief moment they were allowed to shape their own history and religion, organizing the stars, forming Orion, for example, flexing in the sky, arms open in victory, belt hanging below his waist. But he was punished for his confidence, a scorpion's hooked tail piercing his body like a poisoned moon. When I see Orion, I think of you and remember what it felt like for my knuckles to sink into your stomach, for my fist to collide with your face. Your voice, your walk, your gestures reminded me of myself, your figure bright and fluid, creating a reflection I wanted to break. And now I see your body spill open, Big Dipper hooked to your ribs, North Star nestled in the middle. I reach for that ladle and drink.
Oh, God, that's beautiful.
Thank you.
Gosh, that is really, that touches me.
Oh, thank you so much.
And I'm sure it touches a lot of people. Tell us again how they can get it, go and get it free, whatever.
Yeah.
Give them all that information.
Yeah, so it's available online. I believe it's at www.sundresspublications.com/agape/Morning House series, and I think the website or link might come up at the bottom of the screen. Oh yeah, it's there right now. And yeah, and on that page you're actually going to see all of their available free chapbooks. So you can like take little blurbs and previews about them, and you can download all of them if you want, which I totally encourage it because I really love a lot of the poets that they publish.
Oh my gosh! So they can get all sorts of poetry.
All for free.
And all for free. That's hard to believe. Anyway, you have anything else to tell us today that you're working on?
Just that I'm working on my first full-length book, and that should be out sometime next year. So.
Oh my gosh! Oh my gosh! Is that going to be all poetry too?
Yeah.
Oh, full-length book! Ooh.
Yeah, I'm
that
super
is
excited.
Wonderful. Yes, I'm very excited for you, and I know that you're going to come back again because you're a good friend of ours, and so you have a really wonderful day. And thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, honey. We'll be right back.